Hey everyone, we're down by my daffodil bed this morning, which is in my main flower field. And some of you have been asking to see what it looks like when it's actually growing and blooming because you saw me planting some of my new varieties in the fall. So I thought I'd do a little update, and also I need to be down here to be harvesting this morning. So I thought I'd give you a look at what it looks like. And I thought we'd talk daffodils because daffodils are a really fun little crop to be growing. I find them really fascinating and fun and somewhat flexible to work with. They're one of the earliest cut flowers to be blooming in the spring, and they're fairly easy to grow. I have mine growing in my main straight rows, and I just interplant over them in the summer, but they're really easy to grow. They can also tolerate part shade. They don't really mind it, as well as enjoying the full sun. And you can even be planting them in your landscape beds and underneath tree canopies because they bloom so early in the year that they aren't typically getting shaded out by, for example, deciduous trees that haven't come into leaf yet. And unlike some of our other favorite flowering bulbs, for example, tulips, daffodils aren't really desirable to deer and rabbits. And so it's really a great crop to grow if you have any sort of problems with squirrels or rabbits or deer digging up your bulbs or eating your flowers. Unlike tulips as well, they also naturalize really well. And so I find them to be really enjoyable because I love the prospect of any flower that I can just plant one time and that it will bloom reliable for me year after year. There's even the option to be digging them up in future years and dividing your baby bulbs off of your mother bulbs and creating more bulbs for yourself. So they're a really fun and interesting crop to get into. Daffodils do make really wonderful cut flowers. Treated properly, you can expect a vase life of 5 to 7 days. And one of the funnest things about them is that they store for long periods of time. So you can dry store daffodils with the bulb off for up to 2 weeks, which gives a lot of flexibility and duration to your crop when it comes to bringing them into your home or wanting to extend your season for sales or other things. So remember that I mentioned that a lot of critters that are normally a problem for some bulbs don't really bother with daffodils. That is because daffodils are toxic. From the bulb to the stem to the flower, the entire plant is toxic. So just keep that in mind with your placement and your handling of your daffodils. Daffodils also exude a slimy sap from their stems when they are cut or picked, and that sap can also be a problem for other types of flowers. And so we're going to be looking at ways that we can be handling daffodils to make them the most successful and to be able to mix them safely with other types of flowers. But first I wanted to show you my field, which is just tucked in here behind me. I am standing over here because there seems to be an incessant stream of traffic today that is fairly noisy, so I'm hopefully buffered a little bit from the distracting noise by standing over here in front of my hoop houses. I also want to show you the right time to be harvesting your daffodils for the best vase life and for storage. Now, when you look at my crop, you'll notice that you don't see a lot of flowers blooming on my daffodils right now. And in fact, the ones that you see are ones that I've intentionally left there because they had damage from slugs. And this is because when we are harvesting our daffodils for the use for cut flowers, we actually need to be harvesting before they have opened up, which means that I don't actually get a lot of show on my field to be able to show you. If I let it all bloom, it would be absolutely stunning, but then I wouldn't be able to sell my flowers. So just in terms of harvesting daffodils in general, the best time to be harvesting daffodils is when it is still cool in the air and they have a lot of moisture contained in their stems. And really, usually the best time is first thing in the morning. Once the daffodils start blooming, it's important to be checking the field at least once a day. If it is warm out, you may need to come out and check more than once a day, but typically what I do is harvest just once a day in the morning, and that usually does the trick for me this time of year. So when it comes to harvesting daffodils, we need to break the daffodils down into three main groups. So first we have daffodils that are called single daffodils. So if you picture your typical cheerful yellow daffodil that just pops up in the meadows here and there in the spring, usually it has a single star of petals and then a central trumpet. That would be a single daffodil. I also will tend to include daffodils like the split corona types, the butterfly type daffodils in this group. The second group of daffodils are the doubles, so the ones that have lots of petals, they're juicy and fluffy daffodils. Those ones we need to handle a little bit differently. And the third type are the ones that have more than one bloom on the stem. So they sort of have a spray of flowers, so more smaller flowers all on a single stem. And those ones we also need to handle a little bit differently. So we'll be looking at when to harvest each one of those. Now, these days on the market, harvesting is happening sometimes earlier than it used to. So harvesting is sometimes happening still at what's called the upright pencil stage, which is when the daffodil starts blooming and the bloom comes up out of the ground. It comes straight up, pointing straight upwards. And as it matures, it starts to bend down. Traditionally, we would want to be harvesting at that stage, which is called the gooseneck stage, when the flower has bent down, the spathe has split and open, and the bud itself is starting to show some color. These days, it is becoming more common to be harvesting daffodils even in the upright pencil stage. I still harvest typically at the gooseneck stage. I find that for what I do, even if I'm needing to store, my daffodils store really well, and I'm getting a good vase life doing it that way. And one of the hesitations that I have with harvesting at a little bit of an earlier stage is that I do wonder if it will impact the size of the mature bloom when it opens up. But I also don't want the daffodils to take days and days to open when they get into my customers' homes. So because I'm a direct to consumer florist, I'm not selling wholesale to the market. So there's not additional travel time for my flowers. I really want those daffodils to be as fresh as possible with the best vase life possible, but not take days and days to open up in somebody's home. So if you do accidentally harvest a daffodil in the pencil stage, give it a try anyways. It's not that it will never open. It will just typically take a lot longer to mature and open. But give it a try. It should still give you some beauty in your own home. And you'll want to get to know your varieties as well. There is one single variety I grow. It is a gorgeous, tall, all white daffodil called Falmouth Bay. And I actually like to let that one mature a little bit more on the plant before I harvest that one. I just find if I harvest that directly at gooseneck stage, it'll actually take days and days to open, which, as I mentioned earlier, it's not exactly what I'm usually wanting. So that one I will actually let it mature on the stem. It won't be open when I pick it, but it'll be nice and full and rounded bud at that point. And I'm looking for a lot more whiteness to the petals on the bud when I'm harvesting that one. In general, with harvesting daffodils, I don't find you need clippers, but some people do clip and they'll reach deeper down, deeper into the leaf set to get a really deep cut on their daffodils. I really love to just reach down and snap or pull the daffodil. Very simple. It also saves me time and I'm not having to deal with carrying clippers around. So just try it and see what works for you. The deeper that you harvest your stem, the more of a whiter end of your stem you'll get, and it'll probably leak less sap at first when you cut it. Now, when it comes to harvesting doubles, I have some of my own opinions about the best time to be harvesting double daffodils. Some people will say that you need to wait until they are half open. I don't find that to be necessary, but what I'm looking for when I harvest them is definitely a more mature stage than the singles. When I look at the tip of the bud where the opening will be, I want to see a little bit of an opening. I want to be able to see a little bit inside. at what I call bud crack stage. So you can see how this bud is fully colored up. It's full and large and fat looking. And when I look at the opening, I can see that it's cracking open. When I harvest my doubles like this, they store really well for me. There's no risk of them getting damaged in the fridge because they're already open. So the handling is a lot better for them. And I don't find there to be any issues with them opening in the vase this way or with the vase life being impacted in a negative way. And when it comes to harvesting daffodils that are clustered, I've had a hard time finding information on this. In the scientific information that I've found, it's recommended to be harvesting them when at least one or two of the flowers are open. So what I try to do is get them when there's a few flowers that are already open, but that there's still some buds as well, so that I know that the vase life isn't going to be impacted negatively because I'm not waiting until everything is open. Now, if you missed your harvest and your daffodils have popped open, if they are just for you, there's nothing wrong with bringing them at that point. Just keep in mind that they may last a day or two less in the vase. And if you are selling to florists or you have an event outlet, flowers like that can still be very useful. Florists will be sometimes looking for a flower that is more open because they don't actually want to wait a few days for it to open if they need it immediately. So don't give up on them if you are selling to florists or other markets. Don't give up on them. Communicate with your buyers and see if there's somebody who would still be interested in flowers like that. So here are a bunch of daffodils that I've harvested, and I'm going to be heading straight to putting these in storage. Now, the fun thing about daffodils is that you can store them dry, and I actually prefer to store them dry because I find if they are stored in water, they can continue to ripen and open in the vase. And I really want to hold on to that bud gooseneck stage for as long as I can. So if your daffodils are going out immediately or in a day or two, you may want to just plop them into an inch of water and store them in cool temperatures that way. But if you're wanting to store them for up to 2 weeks, I would recommend storing them dry. I wrap my daffodil bundles in paper, both the buds and the stems. I wrap them fully in paper, little packages, and they go in my cooler. The optimal temperature for storing them in this way is 0 to 1 degrees at 90 degrees relative humidity, so similar to a tulip. If you can't achieve those settings, then keep that in mind because it will affect the vase life and you won't be able to store your daffodils for as long. And with those settings, as I mentioned, you can store them for up to 2 weeks. And I just want to be very redundant and make sure this is very clear. This is for storing daffodils that are not already open. So if your daffodils are already open, you will want to move them out sooner. I would not recommend trying to dry store them for a long period of time. Now, if you don't have a cooler and you're thinking about storing them in your normal refrigerator, I think that's maybe worth a try. As you might know, I do store my peonies that way when I don't want to fire up my cooler because I don't have a huge amount of stems. So I do store them that way, but what you need to know about refrigerator storage is A, there should not be any fruit in there. So it's better if it's a spare fridge that you're not putting food into. And B, refrigerators are very dry environments. It's very different from the settings that you want in a flower cooler. And so if you are wanting to store flowers in a refrigerator, you need to somehow increase the humidity and moisture that's going on in the environment. For my peonies, I wrap them and I double wrap them in plastic bags to hold the moisture in around the flowers themselves. So I would recommend trying something like that with your daffodils. And watch out for freeze spots. I always find in refrigerators there can be little freeze spots. Keep the flowers away from the sides of the fridge and keep them away from the fans that blow. And just keep in mind that there is a little bit of risk with storing them that way. And one last thing about storing daffodils is that you can store them laying flat or you can store them upright. I tend to store them flat because it's a lot easier. I can fit them all into a bulb crate. I can stack crates, so it's better on space. But just keep in mind that storing them that way, sometimes the stems can start to bend a little bit. So if you want to avoid that, it may be better to store them upright. So let's talk about conditioning now. Let's talk about how we handle the daffodils, whether they were dry stored in our cooler and we need to rehydrate them, or whether they're coming in off the field and out of a bucket of water. How do we hydrate them? How do we condition them? And what do we do if we want to be mixing them with other types of flowers? So if your daffodils have been dried, stored, and you want to use them for a bouquet and arrangement, and you're not planning to mix them, it's just going to be the daffodils going out or going into your home, then all you really need to do is bring them out of storage, give them a fresh cut of about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch off the bottom of the stem, and place them in a couple inches of water. Daffodils really benefit from shallow water. They don't like a lot of water, so even an inch of water is a good amount of water to be keeping them in. If you're going to be arranging the daffodils or they're going out with a customer, allow them at least 2 hours to rehydrate before they go out. But what if we want to mix our daffodils with other types of flowers? Is that even possible? And if it is, what do we need to know? And how do we need to handle our daffodils to make that work? So I just want to start off by saying that this particular topic is still fairly highly debated and somewhat polarizing. And a lot of the traditional thought about mixing daffodils is that you never mix daffodils with other flowers. And my training in flower shops was consistent with that. If we were including daffodils in an arrangement, we would usually be putting the daffodils in a water pick of their own in a vial and then putting it in the arrangement so that they couldn't be mixing and sharing water with the other flowers. And there's two main reasons for that. So the first thing to know about daffodils is that they have alkaloids that they emit into the water, and those alkaloids are particularly unfriendly to roses and to tulips. And the second reason is that daffodils, as you probably know, they ooze a slimy sap or mucilage. And the problem with this sap is not so much what it's made of, but it actually clogs the stems of the other flowers in the vase and prevents the other flowers from being able to bring up the right amount of water and stay hydrated. So it shortens their vase life in that way. So nowadays, there's a lot of information that points to using a preconditioning method for daffodils in order to be mixing them with other flowers. And the thinking is that if you let the daffodils sit in their own water for a certain amount of time, the sap that they ooze will eventually slow down and stop. And as long as they're not recut, they can then be mixed safely with other flowers. Interestingly, there are some flowers that you don't even have to worry about this with, like snowdrops, amaryllis, allium, and irises. And the one funny thing about irises is that they actually benefit from the alkaloids that the daffodils emit. So they actually get an increased vase life if they are paired with daffodils, which is really interesting. So it's up to you whether you want to try mixing your daffodils or whether you don't want to take the risk, or whether you mix them with most flowers but you avoid mixing them with roses and tulips. I do mix mine quite often. What you need to do if you do want to mix them is to precondition them in water for at least 6 hours to allow that sap to flow out, and then discard that water. You could even rinse the stems off before you incorporate those daffodils into another design. So there's a little bit of pre-planning involved there as well, because you need to kind of know how long you want your eventual stem length on your daffodil to be in order to be able to incorporate it in that way without recutting it. Because you do not want to recut the stems, because if you do, you can cause the sap to start flowing again. And also, you need to keep in mind, if you are selling your flowers or bouquets out to customers, that your customers have probably been trained in their life to recut stems on occasion to help keep their bouquet fresh, or to recut them when they first receive them. So you want to be able to point out to them that they don't want to do that with the daffodil stems. So whether or not you want to deal with communicating that out to your customers and dealing with that kind of extra risk that could impact their experience of their flowers is totally up to you. So before we leave conditioning, back to some basic daffodil care, whether or not they're being mixed. Shallow water, they should bloom for 5 to 7 days. They shouldn't need flower food, although I've heard of a flower food product on the market now that's specifically geared towards daffodils. and that it's actually a shortcut in terms of handling that slime. It actually apparently reduces the slime and is safe for the other flowers. So that's an interesting development. But if there is no flower food in the water, refresh the water daily. And if you keep your daffodils in a warmer place, just keep in mind that their vase life is going to be shorter than if they're in a cooler place. So even if you pop your flowers outside for the evenings, it will definitely strongly increase that vase life for you. Now you may have spotted that I have some yellow and creamy colored daffodils in my field. I tend to lean away from yellow. I'm always really looking for some really special colors, or if I'm getting yellow daffodils, I'm wanting a very special shape or form to the bloom. Yellow is a very cheery color though, and I find it to be very popular this time of year, especially when it's paired with softer colors or whites. So using yellow daffodils monochromatically or using them analogously with fallow warm colors like peaches and oranges is a great way to be using up those bright and cheery yellow daffodils. And if you're looking to do something a little different with your daffs, yellow also pairs really beautifully with blues and lilacs of the season. And the fun thing, as I mentioned, is there's so many pretty cultivars available to us. So we can get outside of yellow. There's some amazing whites and peach and coral type daffodils available to us. Peach and coral are such great colors because they are bridge colors. If you want to deep dive a little bit more into how to be using peach, check out my video on peachy colored cut flowers. So what I would recommend if you're picking daffodils out for yourself is to be looking for some of those really unique colors and really unique forms, the doubles, the fragrant ones. Also pay attention to the height though, because a lot of daffodils tend to run on the shorter side. Some of my tall varieties that are amazing are ones like Delnaso and Acropolis and Falmouth Bay. It also helps to try to get a variety of daffodils that bloom early, mid, and late in the season because there is a range of bloom period on there. And so you can have your daffodils blooming for 2 to 3 weeks. I've been harvesting from this patch now for just over 2 weeks, and I've got probably about a few days or a week to go on it, depending on the weather. In terms of the ones I grow, my very first daffodil out of the gate is called Cum Laude. Then we get Dalmazo, Wave, and Electris, followed by Pink Parasol and Bridal Crown, and finally Lemon Beauty and Falmouth Bay. I'm going to get to work now and get my harvesting done. I have bouquets I want to be making today for my weekend sales. Right now, I've been making combinations of daffodils with some fresh greenery and dried flowers, and they have been amazing. If you're curious about working with dried and fresh combinations of flowers, check out my video on that topic where I share some tips and methods to help make that possible. Let me know if you're planning to add daffodils to your flower lineup, or if you already do, let me know which varieties are your all-stars. I'm always curious to know which ones are working out the best for people, and I'm always interested in adding a few more daffodils to my own field. Hope this video was helpful and gave you a firm foundation for growing and using daffodils as cut flowers. If you're wondering about the growing and planting part of daffodils, check out my video on how to be planting them the way I do in trenches. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.